When we talk about wars, you'd like to think it's over something important, like, say, a country's survival, or at least some deep ideological debate. But no. Some of the most violent and bloody wars in history started because people are petty, dumb, and incapable of saying, "my bad." From a fight over a pig to a full-blown war because of a pickled ear, here are some of the most ridiculous reasons that wars actually began. They may have shaped history, but you'll definitely question how humanity has made it this far when wars were started over this. Picture this. Two countries are one minor incident away from war. Then, a dog, of all things, strolls across the border. That's right, we're talking about the War of the Stray Dog in 1925. Greece and Bulgaria had been giving each other the side-eye for years, so tensions were pretty much at a boiling point. And then a Greek soldier's dog crossed the border into Bulgarian territory. As dogs tend to do, it absolutely had no concept of geopolitical boundaries. The soldier, clearly not thinking things through, followed his dog and, surprise, surprise, Bulgarian soldiers shot him. Greece, naturally offended, demanded an apology. Bulgaria, clearly allergic to accountability, said no. And the next thing you know, Greece invades. And for 10 days, they're duking it out over one stray dog. It took the League of Nations to step in and say, seriously? Over a dog?
You're trespassing on my property. You didn't win in my yard.
Wait.
All of you.
Daddy, chill.
And the lesson? Well, keep your dog on a leash, or you might start an international incident. Now, there's no shortage of body parts that people have fought over throughout history, but this has to be one of the weirdest. The War of Jenkins' Ear, fought by Britain and Spain, began in 1739, and yes, it most certainly started over an ear. So here's how the story goes. The ear of British Captain Robert Jenkins was sliced off by Spanish Coast Guards during a skirmish 8 years prior in 1731. Jenkins didn't get much sympathy at the time, and Britain did little to retaliate. Fast forward a few years, and Jenkins, for some reason, digs up his ear that he had pickled, by the way, and he thought it would be a good idea to parade it around the British Parliament. As one does. Somehow, this worked, because by 1739, Britain had declared war on Spain. Yes, because of this guy waving his pickled ear around. This minor personal grievance snowballed into a war that eventually tangled itself up into the much larger War of Austrian Succession. So yeah, an ear. Who knew a little chunk of cartilage could kick off a whole war? Animals seem to have a knack of getting us into trouble, don't they? Well, in this case, it was a pig that almost caused an outbreak of war between the United States and Great Britain. In 1839, the border separating the U.S. and British Canada was kind of fuzzy, at least around the San Juan Islands. Skirmishes were already basically common by that time, but things didn't nearly go off the rails until an American farmer decided to shoot and kill a British pig. It belonged to a British settler, but had wandered onto the American's farm and had been caught munching on his potatoes, which, let's face it, that probably was the most flavorful thing that pig had ever eaten in its life, considering it came from a British household. Understandably miffed, the farmer shot the pig, which angered the owner. A heated argument escalated into a standoff, and soon enough, both the British and American militaries were called in to occupy the island. For several weeks, the two sides were ready with cannons over the killing of a single pig. Now, fortunately, wiser sense prevailed, and after some feverish negotiations, the two countries reached a peaceful settlement. And once and for all, the world was able to prove that bacon, while delicious, is not worth staging a war over. Now, we all know football, or soccer if you insist on being wrong, can get a little intense, but back in 1969, Honduras and El Salvador took it to a whole new level. Now, you'd think a World Cup qualifier would bring out national pride in a fun and sporting way, but no, it basically ignited a 4-day war. Now, sure, tensions were already high between the two over things like immigration and land disputes, but adding a World Cup qualifier to the mix was like throwing a match into a room full of fireworks. After El Salvador won the final match, Honduras wasn't just crying into their football scarves. No, instead of sulking, they thought, why not take this grudge off the field and invade? Not too big of an overreaction, right? Now, for 4 days, actual armies squared off, like with guns and tanks, over football. Thousands died, and it wasn't until someone realized, wait, this all started because of a game? That a ceasefire was finally called. It just goes to show, in Central America, football's not just a contact sport. Apparently, it's a full-blown military operation. Forget penalties, they're handing out invasions. If you thought a war over an ear or a pig was stupid, well, you haven't heard anything yet. So hang on to your hat for the War of the Oaken Bucket. Now, this weird war between two Italian city-states, Bologna and Modena, began as a result of, well, you guessed it, a wooden bucket. So here's how it went down. Modenese soldiers sneak into Bologna and steal a bucket from the town square. Bologna, being all about that bucket life, demanded its return. Modena, being Modena, was like, no, we're going to keep it. And rather than just go buy a new bucket at the medieval equivalent of Home Depot, Bologna decided that the only reasonable course of action was to declare war. Thousands of soldiers ended up fighting in the Battle of Zappolino over the stolen bucket. Spoiler, Modena won, and to this day, the bucket is still proudly displayed there like it's the Stanley Cup. Talk about making a mountain of a molehill, or in this case, a bucket. Even pastries have sparked wars because, of course, why wouldn't they? In 1838, France and Mexico got into a heated conflict over a bakery debacle that would leave even the most dramatic soap operas in the dust. It all started when a French pastry chef, apparently the most important man in the world, claimed his Mexico City shop was robbed during a riot. His response? Well, a charming little demand for 600,000 pesos in compensation. That's like asking for $1 billion for a missing cupcake when the average yearly wage was only about 1,000 pesos. When Mexico had the audacity to say no thanks to this culinary extortion, Louis Philippe, the French king, stepped in with his finest diplomatic approach. He sent a fleet to blockade Mexico's ports, because clearly the only solution to the pastry problem is to threaten naval bombardment. And thus, the pastry war began, with the French happily lobbing shells at Veracruz, likely hoping to add a little crunch to their conflict. Eventually, Mexico did have to pay up, proving that nothing screams sovereignty quite like catapulting to a demand over a baker's dozen of pastries. Who knew a spat over a bakery could escalate to all-out war? But here we are, reminded that while history is often full of grand causes, sometimes it's the ridiculous and trivial, like a pastry argument, that leads to the most absurd moments. So whether it's a pig, a bucket, or a bakery, you can count on human pettiness to create the messiest of conflicts. We'll see you in our next video.